Coming up on this episode, the Golden State Warriors get their best win of the season, recovering from a 17-point third-quarter deficit to beat the Boston Celtics in overtime. All the reaction from that, including Stephen Curry's heroics and the game-changing impact from Trayce Jackson-Davis. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. It's about 6:30 a.m. for me. I woke up 15 minutes ago. I'm quite tired because I was trying to go to sleep 10:30, 11 o'clock last night, and the game yesterday was still at the forefront of my mind, even though it finished at about 4:30, 5 o'clock my time in the afternoon. 6-7 hours later, I was still thinking about the result because it was the best game of the season from a Warrior perspective. Down 17 points in the third quarter, Steph Curry on the bench after picking up his fifth foul with over 6 minutes remaining in the third quarter. And the Warriors find a way. They find a way to come back against, at that point, the league-leading Boston Celtics, who have been all-conquering, taken all before them so far this season. And Golden State produced a comeback of their own. So many times this season, they had been on the receiving end of a comeback effort from the opposition team. And now they were able to do it. They never led at all in the second half, but were able to tie the game late, send it to overtime, and then were able to win the overtime, ultimately getting the 132-126 victory. An incredible day of basketball, really, if you look at it in totality, with the two ESPN nationally televised games. The one before the Warriors, obviously, with the Memphis Grizzlies and New Orleans Pelicans. The Grizzlies making their own comeback effort and getting an overtime, not an overtime, but a game-winning shot from Ja Morant or at the buzzer with his layup, basically capping his return to basketball, which is great to say. I think it's great for basketball. He's so fun to watch. So to get that, and then to come into this Warrior game where the Celtics look in control, up 17. Steph's in foul trouble. Brandon Pajemski's out of the game, had a back issue at the end of the first half. And yet again, we get an overtime game. And the Warriors entered that having been 3-17 in their last 20 overtime games. Fair to say they were due, and they duly delivered. So, fantastic win, hugely positive. It's great to be able to talk about the Warriors in a positive and optimistic light after yesterday's game, because so much of this season has been truly negative, and I try and be fairly fair in terms of my analysis. And if the Warriors are playing badly, I'll let you know. If the Warriors are playing well, I'll let you know. That's how I want to try and interpret each game. And it's fantastic to be able to come and talk about a positive Warrior performance, because the Celtics, I thought they played pretty well yesterday. Tatum was down. Now, whether or not that was due to the ankle injury, in the first quarter where he had to go back to the locker room, there's probably some influence with that. However, I thought the Warriors just played him really well. I thought Jonathan Kuminga's one-on-one defense on him was excellent. But aside from that, Jaylen Brown had 28 points. Derek White goes to 30, which you're not going to get too much on a regular basis. Al Horford missed some threes, but played okay. Celtics without Kristaps Porzingis, but of course the Warriors without Draymond Green, so they kind of just level each other off. Celtics, yeah, I thought they played well. This was not a Boston played down to the Warriors level. I thought this was the Warriors playing up to Boston's level, and I think it goes to show you as well that the Warriors, and I tweeted out during or after actually it might have been during the fourth quarter of the Memphis New Orleans game, that the Warriors currently sit 11th in the West and the Grizzlies currently sit 13th in the West. Yet those two teams will go into the majority of games, like over 50% of games. And for the Warriors, probably over 90% of games, believing they have the best player on the floor. And sometimes when you have the best player on the floor, that can be enough in one-off matchups. Now, I don't think as presently constructed, given how they've played so far this season, I don't think the Warriors would go into a 7-game series against the Boston Celtics and win. But in any individual matchup, I think the Warriors can beat absolutely anyone because they can say that they have got the best player on the floor. And sometimes that's enough. And Steph Curry proved enough in the fourth quarter and overtime yesterday. I mean, I don't want to gloss over his performance or in any way, but there is literally a limit on how many words you can use to describe this guy. And again, I tweeted out after yesterday's game, like, you've just got to sit back and understand and acknowledge how privileged we are to be able to witness this greatness. The earth is millions of years old, and you are living in still very much the prime of Stephen Curry. So just acknowledge that and appreciate that. And the way that he was able to defy the foul trouble, defy the fact that Boston were going at him. Like Bill Simmons tweeted out yesterday after the game, complaining about the Celtics loss. Obviously, he's a big Boston fan. And complaining about the Celtics not going hard at Curry when he had played with 5 fouls for the last 17 minutes of the game. He played the entire fourth quarter and overtime with 5 fouls. I thought Boston almost went too far on him, where I thought sometimes their offense was a little bit too predicated on trying to get Steph in all the action. I thought they went really hard. I thought they were trying to get the 6th foul on him as much as they could. But I thought he was really disciplined. Like, he picked up that charge on Jaylen Brown with a few minutes left in regulation. And there was, that play early in the fourth quarter where I think the Warriors gave up a defensive 3 seconds because they were trying to slightly help on Steph and double team. And, the Celtics got a lot of open looks. There was the late Derek White 3 where I think Kuminga came over and doubled Tatum, who was guarded by Steph, and then Derek White got an open corner 3, which gave Boston back the lead after it was tied at 118, and then Steph goes down the other end, makes an off-the-dribble difficult 3 of his own to tie it at 121. But back to the original play, where they gave up the defensive 3 seconds, and then Chris Paul got everyone in and said, hey, we need to help Steph out a little bit more here. We need to be more assertive in what we're doing defensively. And I thought Steph and the Warriors did a pretty good job in being able to step up defensively, despite obviously the foul trouble that he was in. So he has 20 points he has 13 points in the fourth quarter on 5 of 7 shooting. And then he has a further 7 points on 2 of 4 shooting in the overtime, including the dagger 3 at the end, where it's the end of the shot clock. Chris Paul gets it to him on the right wing, and he heaves up a rainbow 3 over Derek White, I think it was. And of course it drops. And that's the dagger. The Warriors were in front by 1 at that point after Al Horford had cut the lead to that in the previous play. Just unbelievable. Just unbelievable. And as I said, there is no more words I don't think you can use to describe how good he is. And as I said, you've just got to appreciate the greatness. Absolutely fantastic. This is the second time in 3 games, obviously, where he has lifted his team past the opposition in the fourth quarter. He had 16 on 7 of 7 shooting in the fourth quarter against the Brooklyn Nets on Saturday. Followed that with one of the worst games of his career, 7 points. The consecutive streak, 3-point streak ended obviously against the Portland Trail Blazers on Sunday. But, I mean, he's still in the prime of his career. And while he is, the Warriors will go into any matchup thinking they can win. And I think that showed again against the Celtics yesterday. I mean, Tatum was slightly down. Brown played well, but at the end of the day, Steph Curry was the best player on the floor, and that proved enough. But even though Steph had the dagger shot, even though he had 20 points combined in the fourth quarter and overtime, he might not have been the story of the game. He might have taken a back seat to Trayce Jackson-Davis. Wow. So here's my overall take, because we've all been pushing he needs to play more minutes, right? He needs to play more minutes, and it sounds like Steve has finally heeded the call of fans who have been clamoring for Trayce to play more minutes, not just because it's what the Warriors lack, but because whenever he has played, he's seemingly played very well and impressed. And Steve says after the game that he's going to be in the lineup, which he didn't mean the starting line, he meant the rotation moving forward. But we could have that conversation. But my overall arching take from it is that I love Brandon Pajemski. Pods is great. He's fantastic. He's just a good basketball player. Right now, he's a good basketball player. He does a multitude of things. I've spoken incessantly about him in previous episodes. But I think Trayce might actually be the more important rookie the more impactful rookie, just in the way that he revolutionizes, and I don't use that word lightly, he revolutionizes the way the Warriors play on both ends. He's that impactful. So he has the first double-double of his career, 10 points, 13 rebounds in 28 and a half minutes. But just clear the double-double to one side, right? Because that's not what describes his impact on the game. He has 3 block shots, which he has 2 of them on Jaylen Brown. First one in the first half was a right-hand layup attempt, which he, I want to say, pins against the backboard, but the replays would actually show it hit the backboard first. But still, it was called a block. The refs didn't call a goaltend. But then the moment of the game, arguably, aside from Steph's dagger 3, Jaylen Brown comes down the lane, goes up for a left-hand vicious slam, and gets met by Trayce with a huge rejection, with the Warriors up 4 a couple of minutes into overtime. When was the last time you saw a Warrior center do that? Have the kind of shot blocking ability that he does, especially over like the last 10 years here in this dynasty period where the Warriors have won 4 championships. Like Draymond can do it a little bit, but it's probably become less so a part of his game. Like he can come over and have help side blocks, but he's still like 6'5", 6'6", right? He's undersized. It's not it's not a huge part of his game necessarily. Now he can come over and be a help defender and contest shots, absolutely, and force misses at the rim. But that kind of rejection, that kind of denial at the rim that we saw from Trayce Jackson-Davis on Jaylen Brown in overtime, like when have you seen that? Now JaVale McGee, maybe, yeah, but JaVale McGee wasn't playing 29 minutes at all for the Warriors during his stint. Like when have we back to Andrew Bogut, my man, fellow Australian? Maybe, but like even back, when he came to the Warriors, Andrew Bogut was a diminished version of himself athletically due to injuries. He was still big, he was still huge, he was still capable of blocking shots, no doubt. But in terms of like this athleticism combined with the timing, this is what the Warriors wanted James Wiseman to be. When they drafted James Wiseman 2nd overall, they thought, okay, here's the guy that we can use to revolutionize the game on both ends for us, to be a shot-blocking presence on the defensive end, and then to be able to be a rolling presence, a lob threat on the offensive end, to take advantage of the gravity that Steph and Klay pull towards them. And as I said on last episode, it's such a stark contrast to have a guy that can take advantage of that rather than Kevon Looney, who, again, I don't want to be too disparaging against Kevon. He's been great over the last few seasons. But it is night and day, as I said last episode, between what he does and what Trayce can provide you. And so this is what they wanted James Wiseman to be. They thought this is the guy that James Wiseman could be. And then as he develops, as he gets more experience, as we go along further, he can start to bring his own offense in where he can post up guys and go into his post moves or hit a face-up mid-range jump shot or hit a 3 or stuff like that. And unfortunately, it kind of went the reverse. Jimmy Wise was more like, all right, let me get into my bag here. Let me post up. Let me go for a sky hook here. Let me face up mid-range jumper in the post here. Let me try and hit this 3. Trying to do all the other stuff without actually just getting the basics of, okay, let me set a pick here. I'll roll and dive to the basket and get a layup or a dunk. Let me work on that. Let me work on actually just catching the ball off a pick and roll. Let me work on my timing and being in the right position defensively to block some shots or alter some shots. And that was the issue. He couldn't do any of that stuff, which we see as like simple, right? Like we're seeing that as the simple stuff as opposed to hitting some threes and, handling the ball a little bit still, going the length of the floor with the ball in your hand. So it was the opposite for James White. He just couldn't do the stuff that we say is simple. But he's so impactful, particularly on this team where, as I said, you can take advantage of the gravity that Steph and Clay provide. He literally, Trayce is revolutionizing the way the Warriors play on both ends. Because they now have a shot blocking presence on the defensive end. And again, have a guy who can take advantage on the roll, on the lob. Chris Paul said after the game, he said, there's so much stuff with him that won't show up in the box score at all. And that's the thing, like if you look at his 8 minutes or whatever in the second quarter, I think he had 4 points, 4 rebounds and a block. Cool, nice, nothing hugely noteworthy in terms of the box score. But you could tell just the impact of the game. The Warriors, when Trayce came in, were down 11. They come back, take the lead in the second quarter, and then are down 3 at halftime. They're a +8 in his minutes in the second quarter. And you can just tell the impact. Shows up way more than the box score. I said on last episode, the amount of open looks, primarily Steph and Chris Paul, and perhaps a little bit of Clay as well. The amount of open looks those guys will get because teams aren't actually coming up to double them or aren't showing on the pick and roll because they're genuinely threatened by what Trayce will do on the backside in terms of a rolling threat or as a lob threat. That's not I guess that's a screen assist, but again, that's not showing up in the box score in any way. That's not showing up as a genuine assist or anything like that. And that's what Chris Paul said after the game. He said, we're getting open looks. He's doing stuff that's not showing up in the box score. I suppose the thing that did show up most was the fact he was a +25. +25 in 28.5 minutes. No other player in the game was more than a +10. I think Neemias Queta was a +10 in his 20 minutes, and he was second in the game. And people can say, individual plus minus in any individual game doesn't count for much. I'd probably buy into it a little bit more than others, and I think it's a useful stat across the course of the entire season in terms of cumulative plus minus. Or average plus minus, whatever. But if there was ever a game that you're going to buy into what the plus minus read at the end of the game, it's this one where he was a +25. Because Steve did say he was the player of the game. He was the player that shifted everything for the Warriors. And so to get this guy, 57th overall pick, I want to repeat. He's on a $7.6 million contract for a total, that's the total over 4 years. Not per year. $7.6 million across 4 years. What a steal. What a steal. Now, should this be a conversation where this game leads to, does he start? I said on last episode my hot take would be he'd be starting for this team within 12 months. I might have to reevaluate that and say 3 months. Honestly. I might have to reevaluate, say 3 months, not 12. I don't think Steve's going to go to it straight away. I don't think Steve's going to overreact to the last 2 impressive, great games from Trayce Jackson-Davis and say, okay, I'm going to start this guy over Loon now. I don't think he'll do that. Primarily because I think JK is starting at the 4. And if Draymond was there at the moment, and if Draymond was starting at the 4, I do think Steve would do it. Either Steve would do it with Trayce, or you would have Draymond move to the 5 and JK at the 4. Well, we saw that at the start of the third quarter against the Suns last week. JK came into the starting lineup for Kevon, and Brandon came in for Wiggs. So I do think that would happen. It'd be either JK or TJD in for Loon. But because Draymond's out, because JK's already starting, I think Loon will continue to start. Now, whether that's the right decision or not, who knows? However, if we're seeing minutes like this, minutes dispersed like this, where Trayce is playing at least 20 minutes, if not 25 plus, and Loon's limited to 11 or 12. Even Dario played less than 15 minutes yesterday, and rightly so, because his defense, again, And he hit threes. He hit 3 threes. He had 11 points in less than 15 minutes. Fantastic offensively, but again, like, he's sniping threes on one end and making Neemias Queta look like Hakeem Olajuwon on the other end. And at some point, you got to say, well, this is like a net zero right now. Like, whatever he's doing offensively, he's giving up defensively. So it's like a net zero. With Trayce Jackson-Davis, this is a major positive. It's a major positive. So I suppose it's not necessarily a starting thing, but if he's like closing games and if he's playing 20 plus, 25 plus minutes, then I think you should be happy with that if you're a Warrior fan and if he's playing well and being impactful. I don't think it's hugely important whether or not he starts. Maybe it'd be more worthwhile. I think Kuminga plays so much better with Trayce than he does with Loon. I'm sorry, that's just the case. Like, JK had a stretch in the second quarter where he had, I think, 9 points. He had 13 points in the first half. We can transition into him, actually, because he was hugely impressive as well. And he just plays better with Trayce than he does Loon, because he understands that there's a little bit of spacing there that, hey, if I drive and Trayce's man comes over, I can actually dump off to Trayce or actually throw it up to Trayce and he'll go get it and be able to finish, rather than Loon. Like, Loon is planted to the floor at all times. And credit to JK, he had one in the first quarter yesterday where Loon's man did actually come over. He had like a dump off pass over the top to Loon. Loon kind of tried to gather it, eventually did, and then got it up and got an and one layup over Sam Hauser. But again, it's Sam Hauser. Cool. Not sure that's too much to write home about, but it was like a nice play regardless. But I think it also showed, like, that was almost like a hard layup. Like, that, in that situation, if that was Trayce, JK's probably been able to throw a lob and Trayce is going up and slamming it, rather than throwing over the top to Loon, who's just on the floor, like, stapled to the floor. He's legitimately stapled to the floor. He has to try and gather it, like, fight for the ball a little bit, and then eventually get the layup to go. So I'd just like to see JK and Trayce out there more together. And yesterday's game was like the greatest reflection. I would have loved to see Joe Lacob watching that game yesterday. Anyone have eyes on Joe Lacob? I'm assuming he was at the game, but it's ironic that the franchise, that ownership, that the front office for a long time wanted to implement this 2-timeline plan. Right. That just didn't work, unfortunately. They wanted to have Steph, Clay, Draymond, and they also wanted to have Poole, Wiseman, Kuminga, Moody. And at the end of the last season, they'd had enough. Wiseman goes to Detroit for Gary Payton II. Poole goes to Washington for a 38-year-old Chris Paul. And it's like, the 2-timeline plan is over. We are going in for the now. Oh, hang on a second. Just wait up. Just wait a second. Because yesterday's game was what Joe Lacob would have been envisaging for years. It was the best blend of youth and experience, working together in a way that it has never worked for the Warriors. It's never been that good against that quality of team on that stage, with the Warriors season in huge trouble. It's never worked like that, where you've got the closing lineup is the core or veteran trio of Steph, Clay, and Chris Paul, along with third-year forward Jonathan Kuminga and a rookie center in Trayce Jackson-Davis. It's never worked like that. As I would have loved to be a fly on the wall next to Joe Lacob, just with what he was saying, what he was thinking, watching that. Because that was the ideal 2-timeline approach working in action right there. And it's so ironic that, hey, the Warriors try to go away from that in the offseason, and yet this season, you've got 2 rookies that have come in who are earning like 30 minutes a game almost. Like, Pods would have played probably 30 minutes again had he not got injured in the first half. He's been playing 30 minutes consistently in the last few games. And now Trayce is playing 28.5 minutes against arguably the best team in the league. It's quite unbelievable. But the one thing I want to say about JK, because he played well, especially in the first half, huge second quarter. And then made some plays down the stretch. The one thing I love about JK And just in terms of the Warrior young players in general, like TJD and Pods, Moody, you can add to this as well. I think they actually lift in the big games. Like, I actually think they're better in the big games. Like, this was a marquee matchup, again, as I said, against arguably the best team in the league. And it's become a little bit of a trend for me. Like, JK does step up in the big moments in the big games, and he plays better. And that's such a good trait to have, where these guys aren't getting nervous at all. They're not underperforming. Now, we'll see. Like, there'll be playoff games, no doubt. If the Warriors do make the playoffs and these guys are in the rotation playing significant minutes, like, there'll be moments where they might not be at their best. But that's just natural for every player, even the best. Like, we've seen Steph be less than himself in the playoffs. We've seen LeBron be far less than himself in the playoffs if you go all the way back to 2011. So, like, it happens to everyone. But in general, like, I think these guys, and I think JK steps up and plays better in the big games. And I also think, like, I've been a little bit disappointed since he's come into the starting lineup, since Dre's gone out. I've actually been a little bit disappointed with his point of attack defense. Like, I think guys have blown by him a little bit too much over these last few games. I thought his defense was fantastic on Tuesday against Boston. And again, I think it's, if you give him an individual matchup, like if you tell him you go guard that guy, then he locks in and he can be a really good defender. And you saw that last play of regulation, like he forces Tatum into like a difficult three, rims off, and Steph is getting up in JK's grill, like yelling at him in admiration for getting the stop there and forcing overtime. 17 points, 7 rebounds, nearly 34 minutes, efficient, had a couple of assists, great decision-making game. Great, like he had, was it the first, there was one early in the first quarter where he caught the ball in the corner, pump fake, got around a guy, could have taken an open like mid-range jumper on the baseline, but instead Clay's man came over to help and he just whipped it to Clay 3, bang. Just like really good decision-making game from JK. And there's some confidence here as well. Like there was a play, like what about the dunk over Jaylen Brown in the first quarter where he kind of just like told Clay and Steph where to go? And that's dangerous, right? Like if you do that and then you fuck it up, like they're going to be like, what's this guy doing? But like he's legitimately, calling out plays, making plays himself. And that shows a level of confidence that, yes, he's dangerous, right, if things don't go to plan. But ultimately, I think it's what the Warriors need to take the next step forward. They need JK and these other young guys to emerge as not just impactful players, but like leaders on this team who aren't necessarily relying, who can be their own players without relying on the veterans. I think that's really important. And so another step yesterday. And, this has been a really good stretch for him. Like, he plays nearly 34 minutes. His career high is 40. That was against the Pelicans, I think, last season in a game where all the core guys didn't play. I'd be surprised if he's had another game where he's played, like, nearly 34 minutes with, like, Steph and Clay playing. And obviously, Draymond's out. Things would have been different if Draymond was there. But, yeah, I'd be surprised. Last, in terms of, like, positives, so CP3, 9, 7, 12, 0 assists. Thought he played well, found his jumper in the second half. Like, all his shots early were short, and it's like, he just doesn't have the legs anymore. But again, sorry, but Trayce gets Chris Paul open. He does. And defense is going to have a hard time defending it. They really are, because again, they're going to have to either live with Chris Paul open jump shot, often from the mid-range. Like, there was a play in the end of the third quarter where Trayce has like rolled to the rim, and then CP's got a mid-range jumper. Neemias Queta's right there. He's right there. And for some reason, he just backs off. And CP gets a wide-open mid-ranger from the elbow. Knocks it down. So he started to get going late in the third quarter, made a few buckets early in the fourth quarter, and then kind of deferred a little bit more to Steph, but like still finding Steph. Like that pass for the dagger 3 can't be underrated. Like that was a tough kind of cross-court touch pass. And so, again, what the Warriors want, 12 assists, 0 turnovers, controlling the game. And then Clay. So, this goes back to what I said last episode, where it's not about the shot. It's actually not about the shot falling for Clay. If you have a look, if you look at the box score, 9 of 21 shooting, 42.9% from the floor. That's not great by any means. It's okay. 6 of 15 from deep, 40%. That's good, I suppose. But 9 of 21 shooting isn't great by any means. It's not great, and yet it was still a great Clay game. And that's because the decision-making and the shot selection was there. And I'll go back to it. This is now, 13 assists in his last 4 games after 7 total assists in the previous 6 games. Did Clay have a turnover yesterday, actually? Because that was the other thing that I should have mentioned, is that I'm just double-checking this. He had 1 turnover. So that's 1. So in the last 4 games, he's had 13 assists and 1 turnover. That actually, that's almost more important to me than the fact he's scoring 20 plus every game. So he's now gone 30, 24, 28, 24. Making his threes at a high level. Obviously, that is important. Getting that secondary scoring next to Steph is vitally important. But it's almost better for me the fact that I can say, the last 4 games, 13 assists and 1 turnover. Taking what the defense is offering. Saw in the overtime period, he drives, draws the help, dumps it off for TJD in the dunker spot, finishes. Been fantastic. And it's been amazing to see as one of his biggest fans, as a guy who has got a cat called Clay. It's fantastic. Unbelievable. Just to get negative a little bit. So, first of all, let me just mention Wiggs. Okay, thanks, Siri. Let me mention Wiggs. So he has 6 points on 2 of 11 shooting. What? Can we talk about the layup in the first quarter that he missed, where he had it blocked initially by Derek White, and then he just had a wide open layup that my nan, who is 85 years old, could have made. She could have made that. And I have no words. I have actually no words for that missed layup in the first quarter. That was the worst. If you were compiling a list of the worst misses in NBA history, that's, I don't know how you can have a worse miss than that. Now, I suppose he could have rushed it because his first attempt got blocked, and so he thought there was a defender there, so he rushed it a little bit. But, geez. And this is the thing that I consistently say. For a guy that's supposed to be uber athletic, he misses so many layups at the rim. It's really disappointing. So to come off a 25.7 rebound game on Sunday in Portland, to then back that up with 2 of 11, 6 points. Again, I actually the aggressiveness from him has been good. And I almost prefer this than a passive Wiggs who, if you go back to that game against, I think it was the Thunder, where he had 5 or 6 field goal attempts in the last 3 quarters plus overtime. I'd prefer him to be missing some shots, but, being aggressive than, passive Wiggs where he's not really doing anything out on the floor. But anyway, we'll move on from that. The Steve's obsessant need to play 2 ball handlers and 2 playmakers at all times. So Steph goes out in the third quarter with just over 6 minutes left, 5th foul. This is why you got Chris Paul, right? He is one of the best ball handlers, one of the best playmakers, maybe the best in NBA history. This is why you got him. To handle these non-Steph minutes, to keep the Warriors close. And then you actually, you bring Clay back out there as well after a couple of minutes to provide more shooting and more scoring. Why do you need Corey Joseph out there? And I'm actually not, I got some hate on Twitter last week because I replied to a tweet that showed the cumulative plus minus of the season, and the original tweet was, what is this what's the thing that stands out most to you? And I kind of, in a joking manner, said, oh, it shows that Kojo isn't a disaster because he's, at that point he was plus 16 on the season. And everyone's just like ripping into me, like, watch the games. Like, what are you seeing? Like, he's horrific. It's ugly. Stuff like that. Which I just responded was like, he's solid for the 13th guy. Like, he's a third string point guard who, if Steph or Chris Paul are out, then he can play. And he'll be okay. He's okay. But please don't, I didn't want that tweet to be taken, and I think this is the issue, I think some people thought that tweet was a reflection of me thinking he should be in the rotation on a full-time basis or something. Absolutely not. No way. Like, as I said, solid 13th man. But he should only play when Steph or Chris Paul are entirely out of the game. Not when Steph has his fifth foul and you're going to bring him back in the fourth quarter. That was a period where CP3 could have just handled business for 6 minutes. Just let him do that. That's what you brought him in for, right? And you still feel the need to have Corey Joseph out there over Moses Moody, who had 10 points in less than 17 minutes. And that's just the issue. Is if I'm Moses, I'm thinking, really? Really, Steve? You've got the point god out there, and you feel like you got to have another ball handler, another playmaker over my shooting, my extra size, my rebounding. They're probably even-ish on defense. Like, Kojo's actually an okay perimeter defender, but Moody's got more size, probably more versatile on that end of the floor. But if I'm Moses, I'm mad about that. I was like, and I think Warrior fans should be mad about that. And again, I'm not a Corey Joseph hater. He's okay, but he shouldn't have been playing. He shouldn't. Those minutes should have gone to Moses Moody. And this need for a second ball handler, second playmaker at all times, like it's fine because when Pods is obviously out there, then you can have two of Steph, CP, Pods at any one time. And even when like Draymond comes back, like there is 5 ball handlers / playmakers on this roster. It is Steph, Chris, Brandon, Draymond, and Corey Joseph. Well, really, again, the final point is Corey Joseph shouldn't be playing unless certainly one of Steph or Chris Paul are out, and maybe even like a second of that quartet need to be out for Corey Joseph to play. That was a bewildering lineup decision. But anyway, we'll finish it up there. Thank you very much for tuning in. What a fantastic win for the Warriors, coming from 17 points down. Hopefully this can be a sign of momentum and confidence going forward, which I think there has to be some, like the confidence that could bring for a team who, like, there's been a gulf between the experience and the young players. Hopefully this can kind of bind them together a little bit more, collective team confidence and momentum going forward. And they've got a couple, like they got Washington on Friday. They should win that. I think it's a back-to-back. I think it's Washington and then Portland. Should be 2 wins. And you know what 2 wins would mean? Being the Warriors are back over 500. They would have won 5 in a row. Not counting my chickens before they hatch, but that should happen. That should happen. And it would be a disaster. It would be an almighty disaster if you back up this win, the quality of this win, with a loss to the Washington Wizards, who have won 3 on the season? 4 on the season, maybe? So, I need to win. I'm sure they will. But it's exciting at the moment. It's exciting because even when you're not necessarily like winning games at a great level, which is ultimately what the Warriors want to do, but it's still exciting to see at any point young players coming through and being able to see the start of their journey and develop into who knows what. Like, my last thing on TJD, if I'm going to just tone down the excitement level a little bit, I've said all along, like, I do think there's limitations in terms of how good he can be because of the fact he doesn't have a jump shot. And the fact is, he's only 6'9". Like, he is actually lacking some size, and he doesn't have a jump shot. So I do wonder what his limits are in terms of where he can get to. However, it doesn't change the fact that I think he revolutionizes. That's the key word. Revolutionizes this team on both ends of the floor. Anyway, again, thank you very much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, if you could do that, it'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow me at POC252 on Twitter. That's POK252. See you on the next episode.